Hello, my name's Stefan Modesty. This is podcast 1, November 10, 2023, and I'm going to start off with some random conversation. Going back to, I'm going to use a little analogy here. Going back to, I think it was the early 90s when it was Desert Storm, when the U.S. was in Iraq. And I remember all the news that we heard from that was from CNN, primarily, at least in my case, being in Canada, Toronto, Canada. All I remember is seeing this reports from Iraq. I won't go into repeating or even remembering specifics, but I remember everything was through cable network news, CNN, television. There were radio stations that would, transmit coverage that was from various news sources that were, maybe from other places of the world, like BBC or Reuters, or news from other places other than North America. But primarily here, all the news was given to us through CNN, or at least in my case. Moving forward into 2001, 9/11, I remember I was working in a newsroom at the time, and I remember a teammate of mine, or a coworker, I should say, of mine, was sitting right next to me, had friends in New York, and he was getting emails of pictures of people jumping off the buildings in the towers because of the heat, and they just won't get into details, but people were jumping on. This was instantaneous. This was happening minutes, if not seconds, before he notified me, or he was notified of this, and therefore I was notified as well. And I'm sure there are other people with similar experiences. And what I'm trying to get at here was just 10 years prior, we had to rely on television broadcasting networks to deliver the news. 10 years later now, obviously Desert Storm did not have the internet, or not available for the general public anyways. And now, 10 years later, there is the internet, and people are getting news instantly from other sources other than news. So that changed a lot of perceptions of what is happening. And now moving forward, going 20 years now, 2023, it's November. There's a war in Russia, or in the Ukraine. There's a war in Israel right now that's getting a lot of attention. I won't get into my opinions on the war or anything in that matter, but I hope it ends soon. I hope it gets resolved sooner than later, and we could save. Hopefully, there'll be lots of lives that are spared. What I'm getting at is, now I noticed that there seems to be so much divisiveness, and a lot of people have conformed into different tribes and tribal thinking, and I just find it somewhat alarming in a way that we've all had our cliques, or our groups, or our definitions. I'm this type of person, I'm that kind of person, I'm religious, I'm not religious. There's many different categories that you can be defined as or not be defined as. But I find now that what is somewhat alarming to me is the fact that people go out and protest and exercise hatred on others because of something happening somewhere else in the world, or even local for that matter. But it seems to me that it's like people are becoming their own authority, and infringing on other people's rights and beliefs. And I think there's a line that's being crossed quite a bit, at least in my perception of being here in Toronto, Canada. I see that. I see it in the United States. I see it. I hear about it happening everywhere, including Europe and probably everywhere in the world. But I'm speaking from this specific place right now that I notice, and it's alarming, and I don't like it. And what I think is I keep hearing about companies with I don't know if the term's called ELD, but accepting and diversity and accepting all these different let everybody allow everybody to represent themselves. That's not the word. Let's omit this out here. Let me take a cut here for a second. Inclusivity, that's the word. I'm seeing so much being preached in at least I know in the school system, preaching about inclusivity and all that. And I think it's good because I grew up as a mixed male, black and white, in the suburbs of Toronto, and in the 70s and 80s, and I remember there were a lot of things that were accepted, or you just dealt with it back then, that is not acceptable now, and some of it is good, but some of it is also I miss some of the old ways of doing things, but that's just age, possibly, or my mentality is as a kid is remember those days. But I remember being mixed, and nobody other than family, nobody gave a what. In schools, nobody, there was no talk of that. There was no talk of anything in that matter. I mean, if you got into a fight, you were, disciplined, and for that reason, it was no, you were not allowed to be aggressive or fight or bully, that kind of thing. It happened, and if the school or the teachers or the education system would deal with it in some sort of way. But in terms of racism and issues like that, I didn't experience a lot of that, because I didn't experience a lot of that because I grew up in a pretty, I won't say progressive, but a pretty mixed, diverse community where there was everybody and anybody that I grew up with and went to school with. And I mean, there were insults, and people would cut each other up or make jokes about each other's ethnicity or their cultures, but it was kind of like, you can dish it, but you'd expect it back, and it was kind of the way it was, and it wasn't taken that serious. If it went too far somewhere, that I'm sure there were cases of that, but I didn't see too much of that where I grew up, because I grew up in an urban environment in Toronto, which was pretty multicultural, which I got to say that I appreciate that. I know people that grew up in other parts of the city or Toronto or the province and small towns have different experience of that, being, say, of color or mixed or of some ethnicity other than, say, white. I definitely know that wouldn't be the case. I've experienced a little bit of that in the 70s and 80s, traveling around the province with my white mother, and me looking like, I could have passed as an Indian kid. I could have been passed as an Italian kid. I could have been maybe Guyanese, Trinidad, who knows. And I did notice some funny looks and some attitudes, negative attitudes towards me in rural areas. I don't think it would be like that now. I could be wrong. But going on that note, talking about Toronto, there's many different kinds of people and mentalities here, but I wanted to talk about what I noticed is that there are people that are born in Toronto that are different than people from, let me give you a scenario. Somebody who was born and raised in Toronto, and you can even include the suburbs for that, the immediate suburbs, grew up in a pretty, not to mention that word again, diverse environment, but they grew up with an environment that you're exposed to a lot. And I did spend a fair bit of time downtown Toronto. I had grandparents that lived down there, so I'd spend weekends down there. in the urban environment as well. You're exposed to a lot of different things and different cultures and different ethnicities and different things. So you were kind of, you may have preferences towards certain, groups or ethnic groups or even, food or music, whatever. But you were so much of it coming from all different places that you kind of accepted it and understood that there's differences out there. But somebody later on, when I went into the working world in my 20s, etc., I've met people that are Canadians that are not from Toronto, and they were, that's mostly white for that matter, that came from the smaller rural areas, and they were not exposed to the diversity of that I would have been exposed to, and let alone, not being mixed race like myself. These folks have not been excluded. So anyways, I've noticed a fair bit, they come to Toronto, they get a good education, and then they call themselves, they become downtowners, or they think they're urban people now, and they, act like they're city people, and in which they are, but they have no understanding of, not as much understanding of somebody who grew up here. So that is a different type of person that could be in this area of Toronto. But now you have other people that come from other countries, and this could be a whole conversation to itself. But there are some that come from other places that their parents might have come from other places, but they were born here. They are much like, probably similar to what my experience might have been if it was in an urban or a more populated area. But then there's people that come from totally different, complete cultures, that are born and raised somewhere else and come here. That is an entirely different group. And in some cases, I think that to be discretionary, some adapt a lot better than others. And, that is very rarely discussed openly, because it would be considered biased or racist to segment a group or groups out that do not adjust to the lifestyle that I was raised at, or in the country that I know of, Canada, that I think has dramatically changed a lot. I don't know where this is going, but I'm just saying that I see a lot of, going back to the divisiveness. I recall a lot of media and hype about, really, really pushing hard and bashing like colonialism and, what the English did, and the conquerors, they conquered this land, they pushed the natives away, and they took over these real evil Europeans. Now, I grew up in Canada, and it's a pretty good place to experience, at least for me. It was a good experience for me. So whatever happened in the past, there has to be something good that came out of it, because this is a good place. I think it was a good place. I don't know if it is anymore, to tell you the truth. And now they were really pushing hard with this diversity and acceptance, and for the most part, I'm for it. But I know it kind of targeted a lot. I think a lot, from my experience and people that I've talked to, a lot of, we'll say non-colored white folks were kind of felt that they were targeted as, as a reflection of what might have happened in the history and in terms of the way it's described. And I'm looking at that now, and I'm like, yeah, they feel, I guess you call it white guilt or whatever it may be, but that was really, really being pounded out there. And I'm looking at it now, and I'm thinking, you know what? I don't think they should take it. Personally, I really think that whoever's putting these agendas down, I think it's meant for a good intention. It does create friction, and it's not pleasant. But I really think that, I'm hoping it's from a good place, but that agenda that's coming down, I don't think it personally, I don't think it's addressed to white people. I think it's addressed to a lot of newcomers in this country that it doesn't matter their skin color. They can be from all over. I think that agenda is so that all Canadians or people that are here have to accept others, because I don't think it's the third, fourth, fifth generation white person in Canada that is targeted. I don't think that it's what it's for. I think that may be targeted in the smaller regions, rural areas, where there's not as much understanding of different cultures and ethnicities. I'm going into different parts of Canada. There's so many different parts of Canada. I've lived in most of my life in a big city like Toronto, but I also did live out west in a small little town of 400 people. I've lived in both extremes, and I could tell you that in these smaller places, it's not that I don't know if it's really, I would call it racist, but there is less open-mindedness and tolerance towards other ethnicities, and just open-mindedness, I guess you'd say, in that sense. And it's just a different vibe. So when I hear this word, oh, Canadian is this, Canadians are like this, I go, what kind of Canadian are you talking about? Because if somebody grew up in a town of 100, it's not the same Canadian as somebody that grew up in a town of 5 million or 4 million like Toronto and the GTA. Is not the same as somebody that grew out way out on the East Coast on an island or near the water. There's so many different, and then there's the immigrants. There's second generation immigrants, third, fourth, fifth, etc. People have been here for 2 weeks. It's all different. But what I'm seeing is there's not a compliance right now, in the sense of respect. There's a lot of just tribalism and divisiveness that is just everywhere. And I find it kind of alarming. But what I want to get back to was about this diversity agenda that's just coming down the pipe. I think, and I hope it comes from good intention, but I think it's just as addressed just as strongly, if not more, to the new Canadians that come here, because there is a lot of racism and a lot of classism and a lot of hierarchy and power struggles within those communities as well. And just not to go on racism here, but I don't want to spend too much time on this, but being mixed myself, I've experienced racism from all different skin colors. So I don't see that as it's a white problem. I don't see it as a black problem. I see it's just like a disease. It affects all kinds and some people more than others. There's some ethnic groups that are known to be less tolerant or open-minded as others in terms of diversity. I don't like that word, but I can't think of any other word right now. There is a lot of that, and of course that can't be discussed in the media, common media, because that would be called racism. And we don't want to segregate or outcast somebody, which for whatever reason, okay, it makes sense, but there's a lot of that's just not being discussed. And there are many things that are not being discussed. So I just wanted to open up with this, do some random rambling here, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions or anything to say, please leave a comment. Have a good night. Bye.